Oh, hello. Welcome, Whisky, you lovely Whisky Media members. Welcome to another live tasting. This month, we are going to be tasting Caol Ila, our exclusive bottling of Caol Ila 10-year-old. And we are hopefully going to be tasting FEW Bourbon. I say hopefully because due to time zone issues, our guest star, Paul Hletko, the founder of FEW Spirits, may not be able to join us this evening. So if you are joining to taste our world whiskey this month, which is FEW Bourbon, hang in there. He may well pop up at some point in the next 15 minutes while I'm talking to our other guest, Selim Evin. But if he doesn't, we are going to postpone. We'll rearrange our world whiskey tasting for another time. But one thing's for sure, we are going to taste some whiskey tonight. We are going to taste our Scotch single malt, and it's an absolute belter. We're super happy to share it with you. And to share it with us as well, I'm going to introduce Selim Evin from Chapter 7 Whisky. And it all become clear as to why Selim's joining us, because he sourced this whiskey for us. So without further ado, welcome, Selim. How you doing?
Hey, hi. I'm very
Thanks
well.
for coming on board. Didn't realize, but you're in France. That's where you're based. That's correct?
Yes, it is correct. I'm in a region that is very similar to Scotland, actually. Very nice, very green, very natural. A lot of water.
Wet.
Yeah, a bit, yes. And snow. We are a bit higher than Scotland.
That sounds good. Well, I'm glad you could join us, and we didn't mix up the time zones between France and the UK, at least. So that's good.
At least, yeah. Well, it's a pleasure.
Cool. Well, as I mentioned when I introduced you there, you sourced this Caol Ila that we're showcasing this month, and it's an absolute cracker. So maybe we could start by you introducing yourself, what Chapter 7 Whisky do, and what your background is.
Yeah, very shortly. Chapter 7 is an independent bottler brand that I found in 2014. And between 2014 and 2019, it was sort of a personal hobby, part-time business, because I was also working for a salaried job at the time. And then towards the end of 2019, I decided to pursue it full-time. So what we do basically is we source casks from different sources, from different distilleries. And Chapter 7, the name actually comes from a whiskey anthology. Just under our logo, let's say, we wrote a chapter, a whiskey anthology, which is basically we are gathering whiskies from different distilleries in this anthology. And we have a range to reflect that. In that range, we have monologues, which are single casks. And then we have anecdotes, which are small batches from 2 to 3 casks. And we try to, it usually is blended malts, actually, that we find very interesting and to bottle. And then we have another sort of an entry-level blended malt that is called Prologue. So as you can hear, we have a lot of sort of literature involved in Chapter 7's image, let's say.
Yeah, what's the reason for the link to literature then? Are you a big literature fan yourself?
Yeah, from the very beginning, actually, it's the function of the company. It's an independent bottler. What we do is we gather whiskies, and that's how the idea came. And I thought, oh, this sounds like a whiskey anthology. And then the name came, Chapter 7, because in this anthology, every cask or every edition that we do is like a chapter. And the 7 comes from Shakespeare's monologue in As You Like It, in his play As You Like It, where he describes 7 ages of man.
Oh,
and
yeah.
when you read that monologue, it's quite similar to whiskey. You will find as as a whiskey drinker, I found it very similar to whiskey, actually, changing its character over the years in wood. So yeah, literature. Yes, I wish I could read a bit more as I used to do before, but at the moment, it's more literature of whiskey that occupies my time, I think.
Yeah, well, every whiskey tells a story, doesn't it? So maybe we should talk a little bit about this one. So how many distilleries have you bottled thus far? How many have you worked with?
I haven't counted, but between 2014 and 19, I think I did around 45 Chapter 7 editions, so it remained quite small. But I've been also bottling for other people. So within that, let's say 45 plus 15, 20, 65, probably 35 different distilleries. And since 2020 April, we've been doing also quite a bit. From the top of my mind, I can't tell, but we try to not to repeat the same distillery very often. And so we try to select whiskies in each batch from different whiskies. Let's say when we do a batch, we try to put single malts, but next to it maybe a single grain and a blended malt, and sometimes a blended Scotch. So probably we've surpassed 50 distilleries.
Yeah, we try and do the same thing, like mix it up a little bit. Obviously, with this particular subscription, it's all single malt Scotch, but we'll certainly try and change what style of whiskey we're sending, so that we're not sort of, I don't know, sending 3 smoky whiskies in a row, or 3 heavily sherried whiskies in a row, or 3 lighter whiskies. And there's a loose kind of adherence to the seasons as well, although it doesn't always work out. And I don't know, I'm not sure if you class this 52% Caol Ila as a kind of springtime dram, really. But let's work with that. So Caol Ila Distillery, I always sort of think of it as it's a little bit underrepresented, perhaps, from the Islay set. You've got the prestigious distilleries like Bowmore and Lefroy and Lagavulin, Ardbeg. Obviously I've missed 2 or 3 there. That's not to say they're not prestigious, but there's certain distilleries there that are really popular and command quite high price tags and very sought after. And Caol Ila, for me, is a bit different. It's surprising for most people to hear that it's the biggest distillery on Islay, because it's not the sort of dram that you see sort of taking up shelf space in bars and in supermarkets in the sort of Islay smoky section. What's your sort of experience with this distillery?
I think, it's the biggest output on Islay. Actually, it's quite amazing that we don't see it and we don't hear about it very much. I think it's a company strategy from Diageo to use that volume in their blends and in other people's blends. We basically source it to other people as well for their blends, because this is an excellent whiskey for a blend as well. At the same time, it goes into so many blends, but you don't have that support, the typical marketing support of big companies behind the brand when they put it behind and push it into their distribution network. It works usually, but they sort of keep Caol Ila at the back, and which is good for us as independent bottlers, because it's one of those distilleries that we could, up until last year, mid last year, we could source it quite easily. That has changed now, though. I think probably there's a new strategy or there's a new policy behind it, but the volumes that they release to the independent bottler market is decreasing. So I think it will become less and less visible in the independent world, but it may become, you never know. It may have a facelift and appear in the market with a new image.
We'll see it in like crystal bottles, like 50-year-old Caol Ila for 25,000 euros or whatever. And
well, I hope not. But
yeah.
The thing about Caol Ila is also it's different in when you take all the peated whiskies on Islay, and it's because I started drinking peated whiskies with Caol Ila, and it was an aged one that made me really like a peat. I think it's the fermentation, length of fermentation, and the shape of the stills, which are quite long, that makes the peat, let's say, for people who don't like it, the most bearable.
Yeah.
So it is a lot more fruitier, and it's a lot more acceptable by the general public. And it's, to me, it's like a starter's Islay whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's, I mean, you know, when you compare it to something like Lefroy or Lagavulin or Ardbeg, all those sort of southern Islay distilleries, the peat is, you know, it's almost emotional when you drink it. It's like, whoa, hello. But I agree with you. Caol Ila is a lighter style of peatiness, and it's famed, of course, for that citrus or fruity kind of characteristic. I think it's quite lemony. As you say, they put it down to those tall stills, don't they? Which is obviously, it's just disallowing some of those heavier congeners over.
Yeah.
They're just not volatile enough. And then the lighter bits do make it over. And so you end up with something that little bit brighter.
Yeah. And I think, with a longer period of fermentation, the fermentation brings in all the fruity and the floral aromas forward, coupled with the longer stills. I'm not an expert on the production side. I'm more. I could claim that I know more about the aging process and the wood and the casks, and as an independent bottler. But it makes sense after a while when you try everything around, and you don't get the same level of phenol. Although I think the barley and the peated barley that is used in doing Caol Ila is the same as Lagavulin, for example. It's a completely different world.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm really happy with this whiskey that you've sold us. It's I'm really also really happy we managed to get it cut to 52%, because for me, I think that, you know, it's not quite natural cask strength, but it gives us the full sort of taste of what this whiskey is all about, and of course the option to add water to it and dilute it down to whatever level you feel comfortable with as well.
Yeah.
I do think, you know, a lot of whiskies are bottled at 46%, and that's a nice strength, and it's a good compromise of like tax duty and character and intensity. But I think if you can get up into the early 50s, it's always nice to try these whiskies at that kind of strength if possible, or of course natural cask strength.
We do that at Chapter 7. I used to bottle everything in the past at cask strength. But there are some whiskies that you get at, let's say, 8 years old, and it's still at 60-61%. The whiskey is ready to bottle. It's wonderful. However, only a very small proportion of your whiskey drinkers can take that sort of high strength. So what we do now is with younger casks. Basically, we take a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, or an 8-year-old cask, and we dilute it very slowly, and we keep tasting, 3-4 of us, and then we find the perfect point, in our opinion, where the whiskey performs best. And most of the younger stuff that we do at the moment is between, let's say, 50 or 49 point something, between that and 53.5. We don't usually touch whiskeys that are older than, let's say, 18 years old, 16 years old, 15 years old. But the younger ones, we tend to find that point, in our opinion, is best, where the whiskey performs best. And then, like that, also you can serve it to a person whose palate is not ready for, 58% or 60% of alcohol, and that they can really taste it, they can really savor it.
Well, also, I do think that, I mean, oak does a lot to whiskey, but especially it does make more mature whiskies easier to handle at high strength in some way or other,
Yeah.
I guess it's just because it's imparted so much flavor by that point that it's able to sort of take on the alcohol that little bit better, if you want to put it in the simplest possible way. But a 55% or even 60% whiskey, that's sort of, well, in the terms of Scotch, 20 years old, 15, 20 years old, is much easier to handle than a single digit maturation. Exactly. I mean, the same thing's true of some of the really high strength American whiskies that are put out by like Buffalo Trace, and they release stuff in the low 70s or even mid 70s. But because it's new oak and it's had that sort of hammering of heat and everything, it's sort of palatable, whereas new make spirit is less palatable at that strength,
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's an absolutely delicious Caol Ila. I mean, I just get we're getting some tasting notes come through, and we'll pop some up in a minute. But I do want to introduce Paul, because we were worried.
Oh, he's there.
Huh?
He's there.
He's there. Yeah, we were worried at the start that he wasn't going to make it. There was a bit of panic, but he has pulled some strings, and he's here. Hello, Paul.
Hey, everybody. Sorry
Hi,
about
Paul.
my little time change.
Don't worry. It is just amazing how difficult it is to establish what time it is in different parts of the world, and it's all because of daylight saving time. It's like flicking things around,
Yeah. Luckily, it's supposed to be ending, but but Google screwed up the translation on me because I just put it in as GMT. But I made it. We're good. It's actually convenient for me.
Yeah, Selim said exactly the same thing. You had an issue the other day with Google getting it wrong as well, didn't you?
Yes, I added onto my calendar, and it was showing, let's say, 15 hours, but the meeting was at 14 hours. So Google is responsible for all of this.
This is how the machines are going to get us. It's just going to screw up. They're just going to screw up our clocks, and then we'll succumb.
But either way, I'm really happy to be here. Big fan of whiskey, me, and I'm a massive fan of Caol Ila, so that's an exciting time here.
Well, we tried to get some sent out to you to taste with us, but failed. It's difficult sending alcohol across the pond at the moment, even to licensed distillers. So sorry about that.
Even to the EU, it's difficult at the moment.
Yeah.
Everything's hard these days, and it shouldn't be, but here we sit, right?
Cool. So, Paul Hletko from FEW Spirits, super excited to have you. We've met once or twice before. Yep. You were recently over in Europe as well. How was your European trip? You did a tasting at my bar, Black Rock, didn't you?
Yeah, we did a great event at Black Rock, and it was just one of those ones where it's just really special. Because one, I've got a personal affinity for Black Rock. I love being there. It's a great bar. Two, I really haven't done tastings in, shall we say, 2.5 years. And so it was really special to be able to be back in a room with actual human beings drinking actual whiskey together like humans. And that was just really special. And everybody had a great time. People were laughing, smiling. It was great. But yeah, it was a good trip in Europe. Got to see London, Bilbao, Barcelona, Paris, and Amsterdam in 10 days.
Nice. That's a whirlwind. That is. But you're right about live tasting. I said live tastings. I mean, in person human tastings. I think a lot of the people who work in bars and in the alcohol industry, we had it so good for so long, and there's a tasting going on. I'll take it or leave it. Might turn up, might drink some stuff, and it's only when it gets taken away from you, and we have to do everything over Zoom and live tastings like this, which it's better than nothing. And then you get back in a room with a group of like-minded people, all drinking the same whiskey or rum or whatever it might be, and it's great.
Yeah, the whiskey is fun and it's social, and it's really special to be able to experience that fun and socialness again without the screen in between us.
Yeah. But here we are in front of a screen complaining about it anyway. But I mean, this is the good thing about this. We've got Paris, we've got Chicago or Evanston, and we've got the UK, and we've got an audience of people spread around all over the place, and we can connect in a way that is pretty much impossible in person. So it's better than nothing.
Yeah, it is great. It is. These video tastings are wonderful. It is still social. It is still humans.
Yeah.
But that's the joy. Like, you can, there's room for both in the world, right? It's like,
totally.
There's room for Caol Ila and FEW in the world. I don't want a world with Caol Ila in it.
Thank God. So do you want to maybe start by giving a sort of bit of a background about FEW and yourself?
Sure. So my name is Paul. I'm the founder and previous owner of FEW Spirits here in Evanston, Illinois. We're a grain to glass distillery, meaning we're not an independent bottler. We don't source our whiskey. We produce all of it ourselves. Primarily, we make bourbon and rye. We are Americans, so we're not making Scotch. We're not making anything we're not making Scotch. We're not going to make Scotch. We're not making Irish. We're making American whiskey, which is primarily bourbon and rye, because those are the main categories of American whiskey. And we also do what we kind of call our innovation releases, where we kind of take whiskeys and we play around with them to create new flavors and different things and different ways of expressing whiskey that might be a little bit more friendly for some people and a little bit off-putting for others. And that's what we like. We're here to try to innovate and create new stuff. We want to add to what the discussion of whiskey is and what whiskey can be, making the stuff that we want to make. We're not going to compete with Caol Ila, but we are going to be sitting right next to them. And somebody on this call is going to like Caol Ila better. Somebody on this call is going to like FEW better. And I think that's the whole point of whiskey, is that we all like different things. And it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of people might be familiar with FEW already, or I mean, it's one of the more familiar American whiskey brands here in the UK, or I should say, one of the more familiar sort of the current generation or the next generation of American whiskey brands outside of these sort of older Kentucky products. Because you got into the UK pretty early as a small craft distiller in my eyes. You were one of the first, not the first, but one of the early ones, and you've established yourself pretty well over here, I would say, certainly in good whiskey bars and craft cocktail bars.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely been selling and all over the UK now for, honestly, coming up on 10 years of a presence in the UK, which was super early for my world of craft spirits, or the small batch distillery, By no means were we the first American craft distiller in the UK, but we were early, and I think we've done a pretty good job getting the name out there and getting English and Welsh and Irish and Scottish American whiskey drinkers familiar with who and what we're about, and making it, safe for Scotch drinkers to try American whiskey and realize that maybe they like it. And it's very exciting for somebody like me. I grew up in a small farm town, 700 people in southwestern Michigan. To have a presence in the UK, I think that's just really neat, and it kind of shows you the magic of whiskey, this crazy social beverage we all enjoy. And walking into a bar in London and seeing my stuff is awesome.
Yeah.
I think you did a great job, because FEW is one of the first that I remember started seeing constantly around, because I was working in Holland and I had a distributor, and he was importing you then. I don't know if he's still the same guy. Bart used to.
Yeah, I was just with Bart. So
you he's still doing it then.
Yeah. I love Bart.
You did a great job. How did you manage? Because I'm available in the US. Quite limited, because we do limited stuff anyway. So we are in California now. We start in Colorado, etc. But it's a small by small, and it's another world. It's the States is such a complicated world for me, because it's like each state is like a country, and it takes, and all the procedures and everything admin. And for you, Europe must be sort of the same, although it's okay. European Union is a bit more simplified.
It's different. Like I think the US is incredibly hard, and I also think that Europe is incredibly hard. The different market structures and the regulations are very difficult. So, like on the one hand, here in the US, I apologize for the 5-0 behind me. 5-0 is cops. Sorry.
We know that from Hawaii 5-0. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't coming for me, so don't worry. At least not yet. The 3-tier system here, where our distributors don't own their own products, is highly advantageous for a small brand. So to me, Europe is very difficult, because all our distributors have their own brands for the most part, other than Bart. So you're competing with their own. I'm competing with my sales team's own products. That's tough. Coming over here, you've got the 3-tier system, so you're not competing with your distributor's own products, but you are competing with a very difficult and delicate market, with all sorts of different regulations and so on. Plus the whole pay-to-play thing. Pay-to-play legal in Europe, not so much here. They're different. They're just different. So I agree with you that they're both hard, but they're hard for different ways.
Yeah.
Never mind Japan. Trying to do anything in Japan is even harder.
Oh, really? Have you got product in Japan, Paul?
Oh yeah, very hard in Japan.
I'm not trying. I'm waiting for the day that somebody knocks on my door.
No, it's a great market. It's just a difficult business environment.
Paul, I have a question for you. This was a question I was going to ask anyway, only because I know the answer is quite good. But someone else has asked it for me. So here you go. I'm going to put it up on the screen. What are the origins, backgrounds of the name FEW?
So the name FEW really just means that we don't make a whole lot. I'm a huge fan of dad jokes because, well, I'm a dad. And, you don't need to have too many drinks at night. You can just have a few. When you're going out for one, make it a few. You can come home at night and tell your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, I didn't have too much to drink. I only had a. But that said, we are also located in Evanston, Illinois, which is of educational interest because we are the birthplace of the entire U.S. Prohibition movement that was led by a group of women called the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And the second head of the WCTU was a woman who lived just up the street from the distillery, and her name was Frances Elizabeth Willard. So there are a lot of people that see a similarity with her name and our initials, although that is, of course, a sheer and total coincidence.
Pure coincidence.
I'm sure.
It's a great story.
They don't buy that. I have been banned from going to attend her museum.
Have you?
As well as I've also been banned from the Evanston History Center because they're very cross about it. But such is life.
But I mean, to that end, I mean, sort of continuing that temperance story, I forget the finer details of it, but you basically had to petition City Hall in order to get a distilling license, right? No one had distilled in Evanston since like way before Prohibition. Is that correct?
Yeah, the city was actually founded specifically to outlaw alcohol. So when I opened up a distillery, we had to reverse 150 years of alcohol being outlawed. We're the first, I was the first person to get to make alcohol where Prohibition was born. It's a dry community, which I know people in the UK are well acquainted with, things like the gin craze and alcohol prohibition is, common around the world. But here in the US, it all started where I live, just about 2 kilometers due east of where I'm sitting right now. And it's about 1.5 kilometers north of the distillery. I'm at our barrel warehouse right now.
That's cool. So let's talk a little bit about bourbon, your bourbon. What's it like? What was it like making bourbon in Illinois? And kind of, because it's certainly in the UK, and I'm pretty sure it's true in the US as well. It's changing, I expect. But there was this sort of like understanding that bourbon's made in Kentucky, and outside of Kentucky, that ain't bourbon. So how was that, creating a bourbon brand, an American whiskey brand, but making a bourbon as the flagship product in Chicago?
I think it's definitely an interesting thing, and it's challenging. Bourbon does not have to be made in Kentucky, and that's never been true. It may well be something that people believe, but it's simply not accurate. You can make bourbon anywhere, and historically, most bourbon wasn't even made in Kentucky. Historically, most bourbon was actually made in Illinois. But things happen in the world, and in particular, things like, say, for example, Prohibition. So making bourbon here, I think, is fantastic. And I really greatly enjoy not being in Kentucky, primarily because I think it gives a little bit more freedom to experiment. I don't feel like I have to obey the tradition of Kentucky bourbon. We can make bourbon, it's legally bourbon, everything's true. But I can make bourbon the way I want to make bourbon, rather than making bourbon the way my great grandpappy used to make it. We can use science and art to make our whiskey the way we want to make it, without being constrained by the fact that, in 1840, they made the whiskey this way. I can make the whiskey the way I want to make it, which is entirely driven based on flavor rather than anything else. And so I think that's one of the ways that we were able to create this cool bourbon that is unique in the marketplace, with that really nice kind of cinnamon spice and a little bit of tart cherry in the background. Yes, it's bourbon. Yes, it's got a lot of sweetness. But I think what makes the FEW bourbon really stand out really is that spice level, which is unexpected for a bourbon.
So, which begs the question that someone just asked. I'll tell you what, everyone's doing the questions for me tonight, which is perfect. So is FEW high rye?
FEW is definitely what I would call a high rye bourbon. there's no real definition of what quote high rye means. So like I will say I would call FEW a high rye bourbon, but you could also come and find somebody that says it's not. There are higher rye bourbons out on the marketplace. That's certainly true. There's lower rye bourbons out on the marketplace. We come in at 70% corn, 20% rye, 10% malt. So I would consider 20% high rye. Tristan or Selim, you guys might have your own personal definitions of what constitutes high rye. You're both correct.
Yeah.
I would call it high rye.
No, it's when I taste FEW, what I get is yes, it's a bourbon, but there's quite a bit of this spiciness to it as well. Like it's playing with the cinnamon, as you said, on the palate and in the finish, and there's cloves, etc. So it's you feel there is a rye content. I'm not an expert on American whiskeys at all, but that sort of like spiciness I like, the nice and the malt gives it's some orange notes. I think, I don't know. That's my interpretation, but it's not like a high corn whiskey, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's sweetness. It is a sweet bourbon, but it's balanced, and that's what we're looking for, right? I mean, when I started developing the product, I actually went out and bought every bottle of bourbon I could find at a major store. It was about 50 bottles of bourbon, and just went through each one of them methodically.
I bet the store owner gave you a funny look.
Yeah, really. The funny look came home when my wife got home, and there was 50 bottles of bourbon on the dining room table, and me sitting there with a shot glass and a notebook. She said, "What the fuck are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm working." So, pro tip: don't have 50 bottles of bourbon on your dining room table when your wife comes home.
Yeah, I just have them.
What are you doing, honey? I'm working.
I'm working.
That's my answer usually also. That's why I changed profession.
Not my fault. I picked a good career.
So yeah, I mean, tasting wise, cherry is the one that really comes through for me, and cinnamon, which it's weird. Like if I looked at my own tasting notes and I'd written down cherry, cinnamon, spice, I would think I was writing about a rye rather than a bourbon. And yeah, there's sweetness there as well. It's not all just like dry, peppery sort of onslaught, but yeah, it's a spicy bourbon. But that for me is a good thing, and I think it's one of the things that probably differentiates it quite well from a lot of that old school Kentucky set that we've kind of alluded to, which are more of that oily sweetness, you know.
I've heard from a lot of whiskey experts, and I totally agree with this statement, that FEW bourbon drinks like a rye whiskey. And then the converse is also true, that FEW rye, which I know is not in the packet, but we get a lot of people that say FEW rye drinks like a bourbon, because paradoxically, FEW rye, I think, is fruitier than our bourbon. I just think that's really cool to play against that kind of type, that we are different and we're not trying to be a Kentucky bourbon. The boys and girls in Kentucky make great bourbon, period. In particular, our friends at Heaven Hill. That's why we have to make stuff that's different, is because they make a great bourbon. For us to compete and to do well and to do what we want to do, we also have to make great bourbon, but we have to make great bourbon that tastes different. And I think that's what we do.
I remember when I came and visited you a few years ago, you released an American whiskey, which didn't fall into that classification of rye or bourbon. I remember you saying about what went into it, and there was a few sort of experiments, then it got blended together and everything. But I remember tasting that and thinking it was absolutely banging, like really good. But I don't think we can get it in the UK, can we?
No, that's the one. For whatever number of reasons, we haven't released the American whiskey in the UK. We get some requests, and there's a bunch of people in like whiskey clubs that are bringing it in from the US, but it ends up costing like, something silly like £100 or something to bring it in.
Yeah.
Which is great, but it's a little dear for a bottle of whiskey. That sells here for $40-45. So to pay £100 for something that's $45 on the shelf here is difficult. But it is worth £100. Don't get me wrong.
And everyone should do their best to import it for £100 a bottle. Yeah. I love the packaging as well. The eagle's really cool on it.
Yeah, it looks really cool, right?
Actually, that's a good point. Can you just show us the label on the bourbon as well, and talk a little bit about that, because it's a cool label as well.
Sure. So, this is actually our bottle of the Bond bourbon, but it's effectively the same label. All of the imagery that you see on our bottles.
We're not seeing it.
There's another one.
There we go.
And then, no, I don't know more. That's all I got right here. This is all stuff that you would have seen for the first time as an.
Wait a second. I'm going to try and get you up.
It's all stuff you would have seen for the first time at the 1893 World's Fair here in Chicago, as kind of like a defining icon image of Chicago. So like this was the size of the Statue of Liberty. Think the size of the London Eye, maybe. A little bit smaller, no, maybe not. Maybe quite, maybe closer to like Big Ben, or like way bigger than Admiral Nelson and Trafalgar Square. Just, trying to give some comparisons.
Yeah.
But all gone. So it's like these key images of Chicago history, which kind of gives us that connection to where we are and where we're from, because whiskey is many things, but I think one of the things that whiskey is it's a story in a bottle. And so we're going to continue telling that story of the whiskey in the bottle with the labels. There's a World's Fair. If you want to go see the fair, you got to get a ticket. So we got a ticket right there on the side. The deck, it looks like a deck of playing cards. Bicycle playing cards debuted at the World's Fair. All these things kind of tying in together to continue telling that story of the whiskey in the glass.
Yeah, I remember when we talked about this face to face and about the Chicago World Fair or World's Exposition or whatever, there's a number of titles for it. I ended up down a rabbit hole kind of looking into it. The Wikipedia page on it's pretty good, actually. And it's just incredible, the things that occurred at these World's Fairs at the time. Yep. It's like, electricity, sort of, all these light bulbs introduced, or, it's the first time, and, such and such a technology is shown. And it's, I guess, it's a pre-internet age, pre-air travel age. And so you just had, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people converge on these cities, wherever it was. And I know the Chicago one was a big deal, to see all, the sort of state of the technology of the world at the time. It must have been quite a thing to see.
Yeah, I mean, if pre-internet, pre-air travel, pre-cars, wide-scale public education, if you wanted to know what was going on in the world, you had to go to World's Fair. So whether or not you went to Paris to go see the World's Fair in 1889, now I'm blanking on when the Paris one was, right before, or here in Chicago in 1893, or wherever you were going, if you want to know what's going on in art and science and technology and philosophy and culture, and there's nowhere to go except the World's Fair. So it was a big deal 130 years ago. And 1893 was kind of a turning point in world history. And by coincidence, it happened the World's Fair was here. The previous summer that effectively invented the assembly line in Manchester, where they're working in the cotton and starting to create the Industrial Revolution, and the automobile had just been invented. And so if you start looking at that 1890 to 1893 time frame, and then you move it out 30 years, the world is fundamentally different from an agrarian economy in the 1800s to the invention of mechanized warfare and the horrors of World War I, 20 years later. It's a turning point in world history, and it all started here in Chicago, for better or worse.
Cool. Well, we could carry on talking about that and geek out about the World's Fair, because I love it. But we'll let everyone do their own research on that rather than listening to us.
For sure. Whiskey. We are on a whiskey show, right?
Cool. Well, I don't know if there's any more questions. Let me just check, just in case I've missed anything. But I think we've had most of it. Lots of lovely comments about both whiskies tonight, which is great. I'm sorry you didn't get the Caol Ila, Paul. We'll endeavour to get one out to you at some point, because it's really worth tasting.
I'm a big fan. The Caol Ila does great stuff.
Yeah. Cool. Well, look, thank you both of you for joining me and for chatting. It's been really, really lovely to chat to you both, and I hope that everyone watching has enjoyed it too.
Pleasure, and